Welcome to the Brothers in Crime podcast.
We are brothers.
We talk about true crime.
We don't take ourselves too seriously.
And you shouldn't either. All right, Bob. Today we are talking about the Night Stalker.
Oh, that Richard Ramirez fella?
No, actually, we're going to head across the pond to talk about the United Kingdom's Night Stalker.
They got their own?
They sure do, and I'd say he's very British, but I'm not sure I know what that means. So anyway, I got a question for you, though. At what point does a crime spree turn into something else, and then what do you call it? Like, how long does it go on before it becomes a crime life or whatever you would describe it as?
That's a good question. I don't know where the line is. I think it's got to be, it's probably like sexual harassment. It's a combination of, pervasive and persistent or something like that.
Okay.
How bad it is and how long it goes on.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. But I still don't know exactly what to call it. But the guy we're talking about today terrorized southeast London from October of 92 to May 2009. Isn't that longer than your first marriage?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know what it's called, but it feels like more than a spree, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's got to be more than yeah.
And during that span of 17 years, this man, who would become known as the Night Stalker in England, committed well over a couple hundred crimes. What was he out there doing? Oh, burglaries, sexual assaults, and rapes. And you have any idea who he was targeting?
No.
His youngest victim was 68.
His youngest?
And his oldest was 93.
This is a nasty sumbitch.
Yeah, I learned about this case at CrimeCon. I don't think that you were in this session, but it was one that had Paul Holes and a guy named Colin Sutton, and they were discussing some of their most well-known cases, which for Mr. Sutton included this one. He's the senior investigating officer for the Metropolitan Police for 9 years over in England. And during his stint, which ended in 2011, Sutton led more than 30 successful murder investigations, including two of the most infamous cases in British history. This is the guy who just worked tirelessly to get the serial killer Levi Belfield, or Levi, I don't know how they pronounce it over there, as well as this serial rapist we're going to talk about today, known as the Night Stalker. He successfully brought both of these men to justice. Before we get to too many of the details, in case you haven't figured it out, I just want to be totally clear, this case involves sexual assault, creepy behavior, and the victims are elderly, so if any of that's a problem, we will catch you next week. We understand.
I mean, we rarely talk about, like, unicorns and rainbows here, so...
That's true. But you have a look on your face that says you're thinking about leaving, so... All right, now I want to set the scene for you, Bob. I want you to imagine that you've just settled in for a good night's sleep. I don't know if you've done that in a while, but... imagine that you're advanced in years. That shouldn't be too hard for you to do.
We're pretty close to that.
And I need you to pretend you live alone. It's just after midnight, maybe a bit later. You've fallen asleep, but now all of a sudden you're woken up by a man pointing a bright light in your eyes.
That's not going to end well for one of us.
And you might think about turning on your lights, but it wouldn't matter because he's either cut the power or he's removed light bulbs from your place so that he can keep it dark. You aren't able to see anything. And it wouldn't matter if you could because this guy's wearing one of those... You say it, is it balaclava? How do you say that word?
I have trouble with that word every time I try it. Usually it comes out like baklava, and I'm like, no, that's Greek food.
Right. And I love that. That's really good dessert. So that's what I do too. That's funny. So he's essentially, in case you don't know what that is, that's like a total face covering where really all you can see is the eyes. And it won't help you to reach for your phone because he ripped out the wire when he made his way into your house. And he did that by cutting around the window to remove the part that holds that glass in place. And he let himself in. He's wearing gloves and some kind of a jumpsuit, onesie that adults would wear, like mechanics or flight suits you see pilots in. This guy is soft-spoken, but the first words out of his mouth are to demand sex with you. That's only after he's spent hours on your property, in your house, waiting.
All right, well, let's just say
watching.
Again, this is not going to end well for one of us, and I'm going to do my best to make sure he's the one it doesn't end well for, but I'm getting the idea from what you've said so far, and that stuff that holds the window in that you're talking about is called glazing. But I'm getting the idea we're dealing with an organized offender, a very organized offender here, who has some combination of extensive experience or is rather intelligent, or some mix of both.
That's pretty good. Yeah, and he's going to sit and talk to you for hours. He's going to sit there after having demanded sex and fully intent on taking it from you. He's going to strike up a conversation and then talk about all sorts of things with you, like you're his old pal.
Before he molests me or after?
Sometimes both, but definitely before.
Oh no, we ain't having foreplay.
He seems to have, to something you were foreshadowing, he seems to have an understanding of geriatrics that goes beyond what ordinary folks might know. One investigator said, quote, the way he picks them up by the elbow and makes sure he supports their spines, for example, suggests that he may have knowledge of caring for the elderly.
It's disgusting.
There were times when a victim, and this is, you ran right into this, there's times where a victim told him that he was disgusting or asked what his mother would think about his behavior. And then when they would do that in these times, he would end up reverting and acting like a child instead of his normal atrocious behavior. And one time he even left almost in shame because of being called out for what he was doing. But make no mistake, this sicko was not kind or compassionate. He is a horrible, violent man. For example, one victim he attacked was 88 years old. He raped her twice, and she nearly died from a perforated bowel and other injuries she sustained during the attack.
What a scumbag.
He would often take money, but not large sums. So even if they had a bunch, he wouldn't take it all. He would just take some of it. And he would take other things from time to time, including one time he took a rosary. I thought for sure you'd have something to say about that.
Taking a rosary? I mean, this dude is just nasty.
Now, one of the most heartbreaking things that I've read about this case is that one of the investigators said, quote, his victims come from a generation who are inclined to see good in everyone. One thanked him for being gentle when he raped her. Another said she didn't want to dial 999 because, quote, I know the police are already so busy.
Oh my gosh. I mean, first of all, these British people are generally very polite. It's hard to tell when they're mad at you because, they can give you the business and it sounds so nice.
Yeah.
But this is too far. I mean,
yeah.
Somebody needs... Ain't none of these people got a hammer in their nightstand. They can whop him in the head and take him out.
Well, I know guns are like off limits in England, and I'm pretty sure they've outlawed most knives. So I imagine weapons are not quite as handy as they are here in the States. But this was one of the things when I was in the session and Mr. Sutton was discussing the case that was so striking was just how the investigators wondered if he was purposefully attacking this population basically because they made like these perfect targets where often they wouldn't report crimes out of embarrassment or some of these other things that we just heard, right? Like, oh, the police are so busy, I don't want them to bother with this with me. And so he was able to just continue to get away with this and get away with it and get away with it, in part because of the how do I want to put it, the vulnerable nature of the population that he was attacking. And every single person, every single one of these times that he went in and burglarized a home and that he assaulted somebody, it was always somebody who lived alone every single time. He never went into a house where anybody other than that elderly person lived.
Yeah, okay, he's organized and he's not a dumbass, but he's a disgusting ass.
Oh, for sure. And from the beginning, police thought that this perp was somewhat forensically aware at least. Never in any of these crime scenes did they ever recover a single fingerprint. He wore a mask, like I had said, and he did a lot to prevent his identity from becoming known. There were a lot of countermeasures that were taken. He started these crimes in 92, and interestingly, though, during all of these, at no point in his criminal career did he ever use a condom.
Well, you would think there would be some evidence left behind. No?
Yeah, this is true. And it became pretty clear then that he was hiding his prints, but for whatever reason, he seemed unbothered by leaving his DNA behind, which makes you wonder, are his prints in the system, but his DNA isn't? And how does he even know that? Which kind of led to this idea that this guy seems to know more than your average bear.
Now, you would think that, DNA was 91, the year 91, and there was a Sir in it. I don't know if he got knighted before or after, but DNA and forensics, England is where that really popped off. Who is it, Sir? It wasn't Isaac Hayes. Is it Isaac Jeffries or Jeffrey something? I can't remember the dude's name, but this was a British thing. It's something they get to claim, fame for, other than just, stealing everybody else's continents and countries.
So how did Mr. Sutton catch this guy who was uncatchable for nearly 2 decades? That is the question. Because I'll point out that it wasn't until later on in this 17-year reign of terror that this investigator Sutton got involved in the case. Initially, early on, and for quite some time, there was this huge DNA focus because they had his DNA. So they thought, all right, well, like you said, we've got this DNA. This is our best lead. Let's figure it out. The thing was, though, they developed a profile, and then they were able later on to use some of that advanced testing to come up with, like where the perpetrator was from, and they were able to figure some of that out. They knew that it was from I think it was the Caribbean islands. So, I mean, they were able to figure out a lot about this person. But the problem was, even with all the technology with the DNA, the way they could narrow down who they were looking for, it still left them with like 20-some thousand potential suspects in London. London's not a small place, and it had this the type of people that they were able to derive from the DNA profile. It wasn't like that was some really unusual or strange person who wouldn't be there. So they were left with basically the suspect pool was so big even after they did all this stuff that it still just left them looking for a needle in a haystack going off of just the DNA.
Right. At that point, the DNA wasn't smart enough. It hadn't been developed enough to really narrow it down, I'm imagining, unless they just had a degraded sample or something. But DNA got better. And I just looked it up. It was Sir Alec Jeffreys.
You're close.
And he discovered it in 1984 is when he discovered DNA fingerprinting. But he wasn't knighted by the old queen until 1994.
Oh, okay. So they had to wait a little bit. So the DNA, basically, it gives them something, but without having, without catching a person to compare it to, it wasn't enough to really figure out who it was. And we didn't have the kind of ancestral stuff was later on in time.
Right, and you didn't have a CODIS or anything like that back then. You had sort of the base technology that wasn't very well developed, but you didn't have the resources of like the database.
Well, but now remember, this goes all the way up to 2009 is when they finally catch this guy. So they're in the early 2000s.
Well, by then, they should have been able to figure something out. And if they weren't getting anywhere with the DNA, then let's stop worrying about the DNA and try another way.
That's exactly what Mr. Sutton did. He said, okay, so we're focusing so much on this DNA, we got to try something else.
I mean, I called him and told him. I'm glad he listened.
That's good for you. Now, I do want to point out another thing that was kind of interesting or confusing or both about this perpetrator was that there would be these intense crime periods and then regular crime periods, and then there would be these long gaps. So there'd be 4 years with no crime committed, but then there'd be 10 of these committed in the course of a week or two, and then there would be one every other month or something. So the frequency was very sporadic. It didn't make a ton of sense. It did occur. I think it was mostly on Friday nights, or so that seemed to be one thing that was a trend. He seemed often to strike. That was a night of the week that he seemed to prefer for whatever reason.
I guess he wasn't into the must-see TV lineup then.
Yeah, it probably. Well, I mean, let's be real. After the '90s, it kind of went straight trash. So anyway, the focus switched from trying to identify this offender by his DNA, this mass swabbing of a huge number of potential suspects, which they were doing. So they knew that this offender had certain characteristics. They knew that he was from the Caribbean. I believe from what I've read that they understood that this individual was black, and so they would go to this area in England where we were, this southeast London, these neighborhoods, and they were doing some collection, right? Okay, hey, you're from this Caribbean island and you're black. Okay, we need your DNA to rule you out as the person, which I don't know English law. I don't know how that works, and I don't know if it was consensual or not or whatever.
Sounds sketchy as hell.
That's how I feel about it. So they were doing this, and again, they're getting nowhere with it, just time and time again. So they switch it up. Sutton says, we got to do something else, and they switch to this proactive operation where he employs 75 police officers. He had asked for 150. And they said, nah, best I can do, Rick Harrison style, is give you 75. He has technical surveillance in an area that he's identified through analysis as sort of this favorite hunting ground target area. So they kind of are trying to get ahead of it and say, all right, we're just going to deploy mass amounts of people. We're going to use the information we have about this guy and how he operates to try to put ourselves in a place to be able to catch him kind of in the act, more or less.
We're doing a neighborhood creep watch.
Basically, large scale and super high tech. So as of 2009, the operation was the largest and most complex rape investigation ever undertaken by the Metropolitan Police, which it should have been, because this dude's out there burglaring and raping and assaulting old folks for 17 years. That's a little ridiculous. So Sutton constructed a surveillance team using hidden cameras, lockout posts, and a helicopter with infrared cameras so that they could see in the dark all around these areas, which were surely in Croydon. I'm probably butchering that. Which was one of the Night Stalker's favorite places to go and attack these old folks. How long do you think it took after this operation was commenced to catch this guy?
Oh, no idea.
You're not going to give me a guess?
I can't even guess, because you talked about how he'd be active, pretty frequently, and then slower periods, and then take breaks for like 4 years, which I'm guessing that's probably while he was either in jail for something else or employed in a nursing home.
A lot of people thought he was in jail, but he wasn't, because then they would have had his DNA probably, maybe. I don't know. But anyway, that's what they thought. So just give me a guess. How long do you think it took him? You're no fun. 17 days. He committed a burglary in the area, was observed, and arrested. It was November 15th, 2009. And the Night Stalker finally had a real name. His name was Delroy Grant. He was 52 years old, a cab driver, cricket player, and churchgoer. After 17 years, the elderly folks in southeast London could finally sleep without wondering if they'd be awoken by this evil Night Stalker. Now, the formal charges against Grant were roughly about 22 of them. He was charged with, 5 rapes. I'm really bad at math, guys. Sorry. 6 indecent assaults, and then a handful of burglaries that made up the rest of the 20-some. And these burglaries that included theft, attempted theft with violence, and the crimes he was charged with went all the way back to December of '92 on an 89-year-old woman. And the most recent one was from 2009, which was in May of 2009, a burglary without violence. And I don't know if I made that clear, but there would be times where he would go and he would burgle a house and he would just do that, and he wouldn't actually rape or sexually assault somebody. So this guy it was like all of it, right? Burglary was huge, breaking in, stalking, casing the joint, that kind of thing. But the rest of it, this spending time with the victims, talking to them, having conversations, assaulting them. And I don't know that I made this clear either. In addition, it was predominantly women were his targets, but there were times where he did sexually assault men too. It wasn't just women.
Wow.
But they were always elderly. Like I said, I think the youngest was 63 or 68, and the oldest was 93. And these people, it's incredibly embarrassing. To your point about, the Brits being certainly much kinder than we are. And they're also more, I would say, more proper, right? And
right. Well, I said polite, and I don't know, maybe kind. I guess kind. At least the appearance of kind.
So there is this level of you just don't talk about this kind of thing, and that came across in the presentation at CrimeCon that Sutton did. He said that he talked to various victims who, frankly, they didn't want to come forward, and there were victims who didn't want to press charges because they didn't want to be associated with it, they didn't want to be involved, they didn't want to have to publicly say that this thing happened. And he talked to some who were so glad when this man was caught, but at the same time, it was just heartbreaking for what they had lived through, and then also just trying to deal with that on their own because of this fear of shame and just what comes with the stigma that they perceived that would come with being associated with that. So
well, it sounds like it's just in their generation, in their culture, I guess you could say, all those things combined, it was just kind of a taboo thing to discuss, even if you are the victim of it.
Yeah, and it's just, I only share all that to just say, how sad. I just
right?
feel really bad, and I've listened to some of the interviews and some of the things that they've had, and really, it's just heartbreaking, and I can't wrap my mind around, first of all, I can't wrap my mind around any of this kind of nonsense, violence, rape, sexual assault stuff, but to do that to the elderly, it's just like...
It's disgusting on multiple levels.
Yeah, it's really mind-boggling.
Not only because it's nasty, but also, it's just so utterly disrespectful Not that it isn't in younger age groups, but it's just another level of disrespect and deviance.
Yeah, and it does seem like, right, all of this is calculated. Like it's all part of this control. I mean, we know, right, like rape isn't about, I mean, obviously it's a sexual thing, but really what it's about is power. And so you look at this and he's controlling these people, and these people are, they're older. I mean, you're talking about the investigator talking about how he knows how to pick them up without hurting them in their frail old state. That's like, ugh.
So gross.
Yeah. So you care to guess what old Delroy had to say to the police when he was arrested and when they were talking to him?
Oh, hell, I ain't guessing nothing about this cat.
Yeah, you remember how he'd been careful not to leave prints anywhere, right?
Right.
And so he kind of figured that maybe they were onto his DNA. Maybe that's how they put it together, that he was the guy. So he offered a plausible solution for what they'd found. Perhaps the DNA they recovered actually belonged to his son.
Oh, come on, man.
You can imagine how his son felt about being thrown under the bus.
Your son? Come on, man.
Now, when the investigators were like, sorry, dude, that's not how DNA works. DNA is like, it's yours, not it's yours, maybe it's your son's. Duh. He had another even more crazy explanation, and I know you've given up on guessing, so I'll just tell you what it was. He told them that what must have happened, what surely explains what they found, is that his ex collected his sperm many, many times over the years, many times, and he would let her. That was fine, whatever. She had a sperm collection
because that's normal.
And so what she must have done was then taken all of this massive amount of sperm or semen, whatever, and gave it to somebody who was going and breaking into houses and framing him by throwing it on these old people.
That just makes perfect sense.
So just the goose spreader is part of this plot through his ex to frame him as the Night Stalker in England.
Right. Not buying that at all.
Yeah, nobody was. So on March 24th, 2011, Grant was found guilty of every offense he was charged with. He was sentenced to 4 concurrent life sentences with a recommendation that, and hold on to yourself here, that he should serve 27 years before being eligible to apply for parole.
And how old was he?
52.
Okay, so that would mean he'd had to be 79 before he could apply for parole?
Yes. Which I like parole for this guy. Really, I don't know how their stuff works over there, but I just don't even understand that. Anyway, he was also given concurrent 8-year sentences for 7 indecent assaults and concurrent 6-year sentences for 18 burglaries and attempted burglaries. So you figure that all happened in 2011. So what, 2038 is when he's eligible for parole.
Well, I hope he dies in prison before that opportunity ever comes about.
Sure, but he seems like one of those guys that'll just find a way to survive until he gets out. Mm-hmm. I don't know that he should. Honestly, I don't think he should ever get out, but that's just me. Now, I mentioned that, he was kind of expected or they sort of felt that he had committed easily 200 crimes. I know when Sutton spoke at CrimeCon, he said, I think they were able to sort of, conclusively, without a doubt, tie him to 100 and some, based on DNA and whatever. And then on some other admissions and whatnot, I think that's where it gets closer to 200. One of the investigators on the case, one of the senior investigators, said that he didn't believe it'd be out of the question if this man, over the span of time, had over 500 victims, just based on how little that they were able to capture, and how there were some people who didn't come forward and some people who came forward after the fact, and some people who probably never said anything to anybody.
Right. And by this time, there were probably folks who had passed on.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point that you make. By the time that he was actually brought to justice, given the age of his victims and knowing that he started in 1992, a lot of them had already passed. And another thing that's just awful and heartbreaking about this case is Sutton pointed out that oftentimes, you think about it, right? You're 60, 70, 80 years old. You're living by yourself. That's already like, maybe not great, kind of sad, right? Nobody wants to, you probably want to live alone, but
yeah,
most people don't want to live alone. And then you have something like this happen to you. How do you sleep? And I'm sure a lot of these people, like, you're not sleeping at night anymore because you're terrified. And so it really took a toll on a lot of these folks, and a lot of them, suffering from all of the things that come with that sort of terrifying, tragic, horrible event and circumstances, likely died earlier than they otherwise would have had they not experienced this just horrible thing that
No
Delroy
doubt.
Grant did to them.
No doubt.
Yeah, so not Richie Ramirez, but the UK's Night Stalker, I think, in different ways, is just as creepy and horrible and awful. And so I don't like that we give people like this these, flashy names that make them sound kind of cool in a way. I wish we gave them, like stupid names.
Well, I mean, it's not cool, but it does kind of, capture what they do and who they are.
Oh, for sure. And, I get it. The media is going to do what the media does, and I understand all that. It's just, there's a lot of stuff out there about how, you think about it, some of these people, not this guy for sure, but some of these people that go do horrible things, they're looking for infamy. They're looking for that recognition and that attention and that kind of thing. So, it's not my favorite thing to give them that. But in a guy where, there's so many victims in this case, it's impossible to we'd have to have a whole episode dedicated to just naming the victims, which, again, many of them have wanted to maintain their anonymity, and even in testimony and stuff were, kind of hidden and just didn't want to be, I don't want to say outed, but didn't want to be revealed.
Right. They wanted to maintain their privacy.
Which is totally understandable. Respect that. So just to kind of explain why we've sort of deviated a little bit from our normal naming convention and talking about, focusing explicitly on who the victim was, into now, we're kind of giving some whatever to this moniker that this guy got. That's sort of the explanation for that. Delroy Grant, any final words, Bob?
Disgusting. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on the Brothers in Crime podcast. Feedback and suggestions are always welcome. For links and resources related to this episode, please see the show notes or visit us at brothersincrimepodcast.com. We hope you'll save, subscribe, or bookmark us on your favorite podcast site, and join us for the next episode.